My name is Olivia Harris, and I live in Cambridge, Massachusetts, in a three-story brownstone on Dana Street that my husband Daniel and I bought 5 years ago for $1.28 million. It's the kind of home I dreamed about in my 20s, a blend of old brick charm and modern renovation. Every creak in the floorboards, every glimmer of stained glass in the stairwell window made me feel safe. But safety can vanish overnight, and I learned that in the most painful way imaginable. That winter, January rolled in hard and sharp. Snow layered over the sidewalks, muffling the usual hum of the neighborhood. I had been feeling unwell for weeks, just a lingering cold, I thought. But on that Friday evening, I collapsed while standing at the kitchen counter, a glass slipping from my hand and shattering on the marble floor. The next hours blurred into bright lights, shouting, and the sting of 4 needles. The diagnosis was sepsis. The infection had spread faster than anyone expected, and within a few hours, I was in the ICU at Massachusetts General Hospital, drifting between life and something quieter. Daniel barely left my side. He slept upright in the chair beside my bed, head tipped back against the wall, phone in his hand. My sister-in-law, Vanessa Hart, offered to manage the house while I was in the hospital. She told Daniel she'd keep everything tidy, collect mail, and handle any guests who came by. She said it with her usual sugary tone, the one that hid more than it showed. I never trusted her completely, but Daniel had a soft spot for family, even when family didn't deserve it. That same night, one of our closest friends stopped by the house, Detective James O'Rourke from the Boston Police Department. He lived down the street with his wife, Claire, and their 2 kids. James had helped us once before when a neighbor dispute got out of hand, and since then, we'd become close. He brought a bouquet of tulips, a card, and a large white envelope. Inside was his police ID, a note, and a corporate expense card. He explained that he was heading out of town for a conference and needed Daniel to hold on to it for the weekend. He had to settle a vendor payment on Monday, and he didn't want to risk losing it. Daniel, ever the responsible one, tucked the envelope into the top drawer of my desk in the study. It was a heavy oak desk, a piece I'd inherited from my late father. The drawer locked with a small brass key, which Daniel placed in the ceramic dish on the hallway table. He thought no more of it. Our home had cameras installed, a precaution I'd insisted on after a break-in 2 years earlier, but neither of us imagined we'd ever actually need them again. Back in the hospital, I woke briefly around midnight. My fever had dipped for the first time in 2 days. My throat was raw from the oxygen tube, and I could barely speak, but I managed to whisper, "I want to go home." Daniel smiled weakly, brushing my hair away from my forehead. "Just one more day," he said. "You're getting better." He didn't tell me what was happening miles away in our quiet Cambridge house, that while I was clinging to life, someone was already taking advantage of our absence. Vanessa arrived at the house just after Daniel left the hospital that evening. The motion camera above the porch light caught her red coat and black boots as she unlocked the front door. She waved toward the camera, assuming no one would ever check the footage. She wandered through the living room, fed our old tabby cat Milo, and poured herself a glass of wine. Then she walked straight to the study. The video showed her opening the hallway door, taking the small brass key, and slipping it into the lock of the desk drawer. She hesitated for a moment before pulling out the white envelope. She opened it, peeked inside, and smiled, a wide, satisfied smile that made my stomach twist when I saw it later. She slipped the card and note into her coat pocket, then carefully locked the drawer again. From there, she left the house and drove straight into downtown Boston. What she did over the next several hours would soon become a viral headline across social media. Vanessa tested the card at a cafe, then began a spending spree that looked like something out of a luxury movie montage. Within 9 hours, she spent $75,000. She bought 2 Hermes handbags, 3 diamond bracelets from a Back Bay boutique, and ordered a limited edition Cartier watch online worth nearly $25,000. She moved fast, like someone who'd planned this moment all along. The final camera clip from that night showed her standing in our backyard at dawn. The sky was pale blue, and the snow had barely melted. She lit our small fire pit, dropped something shiny into the flames, and watched it burn. Sparks floated around her like fireflies. Later, investigators would confirm that what she burned was the card itself. She must have thought that destroying it would erase the evidence. Meanwhile, I was still in the hospital, unaware of everything. My body was starting to recover, though my mind was foggy. The nurses smiled when I opened my eyes and whispered for water. They said I was lucky, that another few hours without antibiotics might have ended me. I believed them. But luck, as I learned, has a cruel sense of timing. By morning, my phone, which Daniel had left charging on the bedside table, was flooded with notifications. Friends were tagging me in local posts, asking if the woman in the viral clip was related to me. I had no idea what they meant. Daniel scrolled through his feed, his face draining of color. Someone had uploaded the footage from our doorbell camera. The caption read, "Woman caught stealing from her sick sister's house. Boston's own real-life scandal." That was how we found out. The video had already been shared over 50,000 times. The red coat, the white envelope, the smile. Everything was visible. Strangers were speculating in the comments, some even praising how bold she looked. They didn't know who she was yet, but they soon would. Daniel contacted the police, not realizing that the man whose card she stole was one of them. Within an hour, Detective O'Rourke himself saw the clip at his station. The timestamps on the footage matched the unauthorized transactions from his account exactly. By the time he called Daniel, he wasn't angry, just focused. "Don't touch anything in the house," he said. "We'll handle it." That was the moment my world tilted again. I had survived an illness that nearly killed me, only to discover that betrayal waited right inside my home. I thought the worst had already passed, but it was only the beginning. Because the next morning, when I finally walked through my front door, the flashing blue lights were already there. The day I was released from the ICU, I thought the worst was behind me. My body still ached from the infection, but I could finally breathe without machines helping me. I had no idea that as I lay hooked to IVs, my sister-in-law Vanessa had turned our home into a crime scene. When I finally returned to our brownstone, Daniel was pale and quiet. He had been on his phone nonstop since morning, talking to banks, friends, and the police. I assumed it was about my medical bills until I saw his face. Something else had gone wrong. He hesitated before telling me, "Liv, there's something I need to explain before you see it online." Before I could ask what he meant, he handed me his phone. There, playing on the screen, was a grainy clip from our doorbell camera. Vanessa stood on our porch in her bright red coat, fumbling with a key. The timestamp showed the night I'd been in critical condition. The next clip showed her moving through the house like she owned it, smiling, humming to herself, stopping only to pose in front of the hallway mirror. I felt my throat tighten as I watched her take the small brass key from the ceramic dish, unlock my desk, and pull out the white envelope Detective O'Rourke had left with Daniel. She stared straight at the lens and actually blew a kiss before walking out the front door. My mind couldn't process it. I whispered, "She stole from me?" Daniel swallowed hard. "It wasn't your card." "What?" He explained everything. The card had belonged to Detective James O'Rourke, our neighbor and friend. It wasn't a personal credit card. It was an official expense card from the Boston Police Department's training division. James had trusted us to hold it for the weekend while he was away. And somehow, Vanessa had found it, taken it, and spent $75,000 in less than 9 hours. I sat down, numb. 75,000? How is that even possible? Daniel scrolled through the transactions the bank had flagged. 2 Hermes handbags from Newberry Street, 3 diamond bracelets from a Back Bay boutique, and an online order for a limited edition Cartier watch priced at $24,600. The spree had ended at sunrise, when Vanessa took the card outside and burned it in our fire pit. "She burned it," I whispered, remembering the faint smell of smoke that had greeted us when we came home. Daniel nodded. "And she recorded herself doing it. The camera caught the whole thing." The footage had already spread across social media. A neighbor's motion alert had automatically shared it with the community safety group. From there, it jumped to Facebook, then to TikTok, where someone added dramatic music and called it the White Envelope Heist. The clip had millions of views. At first, people didn't know who the woman was. But the internet always finds out. Within hours, strangers had connected her face to her name, tagging her salon business, her Instagram, even her car's license plate. The comments made my stomach twist. Some people mocked her. Others praised her audacity. But most were angry, furious that someone could steal from a sick relative and look so pleased doing it. Daniel muted the phone and looked at me helplessly. James already knows. He saw the video before I did. The next morning, Detective O'Rourke showed up at our door. He wasn't in uniform, but 2 officers stood behind him. His expression was calm, almost too calm. "Olivia," he said, shaking my hand gently. "I'm glad you're back home. I'm sorry. This is the first thing you have to deal with." I tried to apologize, but he stopped me. "You did nothing wrong. She broke into your desk, took government property, and committed fraud. We'll handle it." He explained how they had tracked the purchases. Every transaction had been time-stamped, and the store cameras matched Vanessa perfectly. At one boutique, she had posed for selfies while the clerk boxed the bracelets. At another, she bragged about having a cop boyfriend who'd never let her get caught. When the stores were contacted, they immediately turned over the receipts and footage. Some of the items hadn't even shipped yet, so the orders could be reversed. Others had been picked up in person and were now evidence. The police asked Daniel to unlock the study so they could collect prints. I followed them into the room that used to be my quiet place, the oak desk, the leather chair, the books I loved. Now it looked like the aftermath of a storm. The drawer still smelled faintly of smoke. A thin layer of ash clung to the brass handle, probably from her gloves after burning the card. "Her fingerprints are all over this," the forensics officer said, dusting the drawer. "This will be open and shut." I should have felt relieved, but all I felt was hollow. Vanessa had always been difficult, selfish, and entitled, but this was beyond anything I could have imagined. She had come into our home while I was fighting for my life, stolen from a police officer, and then acted like the world owed her the thrill. Later that day, my mother-in-law, Margaret, called. Her voice trembled between anger and denial. "Olivia, please don't press charges. Vanessa made a mistake, but she's family. We can fix this quietly." I almost laughed. Quietly? "Margaret, the entire internet has seen the video."
"She's my daughter," she said.
"I can't let her go to jail." "You should have thought about that before she stole $75,000. She hung up crying. I didn't feel bad. For once, I wasn't the one to bend for family peace. That evening, as the sun sank over the Charles River, blue lights flashed outside our house. I looked through the window and saw 2 unmarked police cars. James was there, speaking into his radio. He looked up at me and nodded once. The knock on Vanessa's door came 15 minutes later. She lived in an apartment above her salon in Somerville. According to the report, later, she opened the door in silk pajamas, holding her phone like she'd just woken up. She didn't even have time to hide the bags and jewelry scattered across her bed. "Vanessa Hart," James said, voice steady. "You're under arrest for theft, credit card fraud, and destruction of evidence." She froze, then laughed nervously. "You can't be serious. My sister-in-law told me to use that card." But the camera footage told a different story. When she tried to close the door, the officers moved in. Within minutes, she was in handcuffs, escorted past her shocked neighbors as cameras rolled. The viral clip had a sequel now, the red coat arrest. Back at home, I sat beside Daniel, watching the news replay the story. The headline read, "Boston woman caught on camera stealing $75,000 from police detective's card." It should have been humiliating for our family, but instead, I felt something close to relief. For years, Vanessa had manipulated everyone, lying, guilt-tripping, playing the victim. Now the truth was undeniable. I turned off the TV and rested my head on Daniel's shoulder. "I guess karma really does know how to knock," I said softly. He smiled faintly, and this time, it brought handcuffs. Outside, the snow kept falling, blanketing the streets in silence. For the first time in weeks, I finally felt safe again, even if the peace came wrapped in chaos. I didn't know yet that the trial ahead would test every nerve I had, but at least the truth was out, and it was loud enough for the world to hear. By the time Monday morning rolled around, I hadn't slept a wink. The house that once felt warm and familiar now felt foreign, like I was living inside a stranger's story. The police had taken copies of our camera footage, and our once quiet Cambridge neighborhood was buzzing with gossip. People slowed their cars when passing our house, whispering about the woman in the red coat. I could almost feel the weight of their curiosity pressing through the windows. Daniel tried to make me eat something, but I couldn't even taste the coffee he set in front of me. All I could think about was that Vanessa was still out there, pretending nothing had happened. My body was still weak from the infection, but anger had replaced exhaustion. I wanted answers. How could someone who shared my family name do something so cruel, so calculated, while I lay fighting for my life? Just after 8, 2 unmarked police cars parked at the curb outside our house. The sight of them sent a chill down my spine. Through the window, I saw Detective James O'Rourke step out, his coat buttoned against the wind, a small file tucked under his arm. 2 uniformed officers followed behind him. My stomach tightened. I knew why they were here. Daniel opened the door before they even knocked. "She's upstairs," he said quietly. I didn't even know Vanessa had come that morning. She must have thought that if she showed up, she could talk her way out of the mess, maybe convince us to help her. But the police weren't there to negotiate. James nodded once. "We have a warrant." The sound their shoes echoed through the hallway as they climbed the stairs. I stayed in the living room, clutching my robe. My hands were shaking so badly that I gripped the armrest to steady them. A moment later, the front door opened again. Vanessa appeared at the top of the stairs, holding a coffee mug like she hadn't a care in the world. When she saw James, her face stiffened. "What's going on?" she asked, her tone caught somewhere between annoyance and fear. "Vanessa Hart?" James said, his voice calm but firm. "Yes," she said, trying to sound confident. "We have a warrant for your arrest on charges of theft, fraud, and destruction of property."
Her jaw dropped.
"This is ridiculous. Olivia told me I could use that card." James opened the file in his hand, revealing printed screenshots, her walking through our house, unlocking the desk, burning the card. "That's you in these images, correct?" She froze. "That's taken out of context," she stammered. "I was helping. His brow lifted. "By spending $75,000 on luxury goods and then burning the evidence." For a moment, I thought she'd faint. Then, like always, she switched tactics. "You don't understand," she said, glancing toward me. "I was under so much pressure. Olivia owes me." I looked after her house. That was the moment I stood up. My voice cracked, but it carried through the room. "You didn't look after my house. You looted it." Her eyes snapped to me, full of venom. "You think you're so perfect, Olivia. You've always looked down on me." The officers moved closer. James kept his voice even. "Ma'am, you need to put the cup down." She ignored him. "I should have let you rot in that hospital. You act like a saint, but you're just like everyone else, selfish." Daniel stepped between us. "Enough," he said sharply. "You've done enough." When she tried to back away, one officer gently but firmly took her wrist. She jerked it away, but it was pointless. Within seconds, the click of handcuffs echoed through the hall. "Vanessa Hart, you have the right to remain silent," the officer began, reciting her Miranda rights. Her protests grew weaker as she realized there was no escape. Outside, a few neighbors had already gathered, watching from their porches as she was escorted down the steps. Some filmed the scene on their phones. One even muttered, "That's the woman from the video." James stayed behind, giving Daniel and me a moment to breathe. "We'll take her downtown for processing," he said gently. "The evidence is solid. We'll recover most of what she purchased. The banks have already frozen the charges." I nodded, but my throat tightened. "What happens next?" "She'll be arraigned in the morning," he said. "After that, it'll go through the courts." He hesitated, then added quietly, "I know this is painful, Olivia, but you did the right thing. She needs to be held accountable." After they left, the silence in the house felt heavier than before. Daniel closed the curtains to block the flashes from the reporters already gathering outside. I sank onto the couch, still trembling. It felt unreal. Just a week ago, I'd been worried about surviving an infection. Now I was dealing with a public scandal. By noon, news outlets had already picked up the story. My phone buzzed nonstop with messages. Headlines flashed across every screen. Woman arrested after viral credit card theft video in Cambridge. The comments were merciless. Some people sympathized with me, others mocked Vanessa's arrogance, but all of it made me feel exposed. That evening, I stood at the window and watched the streetlights flicker on. The snow from the morning had turned into slush, washing away footprints on the sidewalk. Daniel came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my shoulders. "She's gone," he said quietly. "It's over." But it didn't feel over. It felt like a wound that had only just begun to bleed. "Do you think she'll go to jail?" I asked. He exhaled. "Probably." James said the evidence is overwhelming. Part of me wanted to feel vindicated, but another part ached for the woman who'd once been family. I thought about all the family dinners, the birthdays, the laughter that now felt like lies. Vanessa had always been jealous, but I'd never imagined her capable of something so reckless and cruel. That night, I walked into my study, the same one she had ransacked, and ran my hand along the surface of my father's old desk. The brass key dish still sat there, empty now. I placed the key back inside and locked the drawer. It felt symbolic, like reclaiming something that had been stolen. The next morning, James called. Vanessa had confessed after realizing the full extent of the evidence against her. She tried to spin it as a moment of desperation, saying she thought she could borrow the money to help pay her debts. But the video of her laughing as she burned the card told a different story. When I hung up, I looked around my quiet home and finally let the tears fall. Not just for the betrayal, but for everything that had been lost, the trust, the innocence, the illusion that family always means safety. Cambridge was still blanketed in cold that week, but for the first time since my illness, I opened the window. The air was sharp, but it felt clean. Somewhere down the block, a neighbor's child was building a snowman. Life, it seemed, was still moving forward. And as painful as it all was, I realized that maybe this was the moment I needed to start over, stronger, wiser, and unwilling to ever let betrayal walk through my door again. The day of Vanessa's arraignment felt like the closing scene of a movie I never asked to be part of. The courthouse in Suffolk County stood tall against the gray March sky, its stone steps slick with morning rain. I stood there with Daniel, both of us silent, both of us knowing that whatever happened inside those walls would permanently reshape our family. The story had long stopped being private. News vans lined the curb, and the words, "white envelope heist," glowed from every reporter's microphone. Vanessa's bright red coat had become infamous, a symbol of betrayal wrapped in arrogance. Strangers whispered as I walked by, their eyes full of curiosity and pity. I didn't hide. I had survived worse. I had survived near death in a hospital bed, and then the discovery that someone I once called family had used my vulnerability as her opportunity. Inside the courtroom, Vanessa sat at the defense table in a beige prison jumpsuit, her once perfect hair pulled back tightly. Gone was the woman who strutted through luxury stores on Newbury Street. The weight of exposure had stripped away every layer of glamour she had used to disguise herself. When she turned and saw me, her eyes flickered, not with remorse, but with bitterness. The judge, a composed woman in her 60s named Eleanor Briggs, reviewed the evidence. The security footage, the receipts, and the testimony from Detective O'Rourke were overwhelming. Vanessa's attorney tried to argue that she had been emotionally distressed and temporarily unstable, but the prosecutor countered smoothly, stating that Vanessa had made over a dozen conscious transactions, each one deliberate, each one signed and recorded. When the judge asked if Vanessa had anything to say, she stood shakily. "I made a mistake," she said. "I thought I could fix it before anyone noticed. I didn't mean to hurt my family." Her voice trembled, but there were no tears. I had heard that tone before, practiced, strategic, the same one she used to escape consequences her entire life. The courtroom stayed silent. Even her mother, Margaret, sat motionless, clutching her purse like a lifeline. Judge Briggs leaned forward slightly. "Miss Hart, The camera footage shows you smiling, posing, and burning evidence. That's not a momentary lapse of judgment. That's premeditated fraud. Vanessa's gaze dropped to the floor. The final ruling came quickly. She was sentenced to 1 year in the Suffolk County House of Correction, with 6 months to serve in custody and the remaining 6 on probation. She was also ordered to pay $75,000 in restitution to the bank and the boutiques, along with $8,500 in legal and processing fees. The judge included 300 hours of mandatory community service and permanent revocation of her business license. As the bailiffs escorted her out, Vanessa turned her head toward me one last time. "You ruined me," she hissed. I didn't answer. The truth was simple. She had ruined herself. Life after the sentencing moved forward, but the echoes of what happened lingered like dust that refused to settle. I replaced every lock in our brownstone and removed the family spare key that had once hung near the door. Daniel and I installed a wall safe in the study and added 2-step verification to every bank account. I even changed the Wi-Fi password, a small thing, but it made me feel like I was reclaiming control over my own space. James O'Rourke and his wife, Claire, came over one weekend for dinner. The conversation was gentle, almost cautious, but there was a quiet respect between us now that went beyond friendship. I handed James a sealed envelope containing a check to cover the inconvenience his department had faced. He slid it back toward me, without even opening it. "Olivia," he said, "what you went through wasn't your fault. I told my team the same thing. You don't owe anyone a cent." I smiled faintly. "Then at least take it as a donation to the department's training fund." He chuckled.
"Deal."
Before they left, Claire hugged me tightly. "You know," she said softly, "sometimes it takes a storm like this to see who stands with you." She was right. The storm had stripped away the false loyalties in my life. I had always believed that blood was the strongest bond, but now I understood that integrity mattered far more than DNA. Margaret, my mother-in-law, tried one last time to smooth things over. She showed up on our porch one Saturday afternoon, clutching a tin of cookies and wearing the expression of a woman torn between guilt and pride. "I just wish," she began, "that this hadn't gone so far. She's paying for it every day." "She's paying for her choices," I said evenly. "That's not cruelty, it's consequence." Her eyes glistened. "You could have forgiven her quietly." "I forgave her," I said. "But forgiveness isn't the same as forgetting. I won't pretend it didn't happen." Margaret sighed, set the tin down on the porch rail, and left without another word. I watched her walk away through the pale light, the sound of her heels fading into the street. It wasn't hatred I felt, it was finality. Months later, life started to regain rhythm. I began working remotely again, pouring my focus into digital marketing projects that gave me both income and purpose. Daniel and I spent weekends exploring small towns along the New England coast. Every night, when I climbed the stairs and saw the soft colors of our stained glass window catching the last light of dusk, I felt something like peace. But I also knew I was changed. I no longer believed that silence was kindness or that loyalty required blindness. Trust had become sacred to me, fragile, like glass, beautiful, but never unbreakable. The media eventually moved on, though the story still resurfaces now and then. People send messages asking if I'm that Olivia Harris from the viral clip. I never deny it. I just tell them the truth. It hurt, I say. It hurt to see my family fall apart in front of millions of strangers. But I'm grateful the camera was rolling. It didn't destroy my family, the truth did. Sometimes I still replay that footage, not to relive the pain, but to remind myself of what I survived. In the background of the video, you can hear the faint hum of our refrigerator, the soft clink of her keys, and then that careless smile as she walks away with the envelope. It's haunting, but it's also clarifying. That moment marked the end of one version of my life and the beginning of another. On the anniversary of the arrest, I opened my closet and looked at one of the recovered Hermes bags that the court returned. I kept it not as a trophy but as a symbol. The leather gleamed under the light, untouched, still in its box. It represented what Vanessa tried to steal and what she never could, my integrity, my voice, and my sense of justice. As I closed the closet, Daniel came up behind me, wrapping an arm around my waist. "Ready for a fresh start?" he asked. I smiled. Already started. Outside, Cambridge was alive again, the kind of city that forgives storms by blooming back to life. The sidewalks were busy, children were laughing, and the air smelled faintly of rain. I stood at the window and let the light fall across my face. The chaos had ended. The boundaries were clear. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't surviving anymore. I was living on my own terms, in a home that no one would ever turn into a battleground again.